The text came through just as I was buried in a compliance spreadsheet thick enough to double as airport tarmac. My dad needs you in the boardroom. Urgent. No greeting, no signature. Just that. I stared at the message like it had insulted my ancestors. The number belonged to Ryan Mercer. Ryan, the CEO's son. Ryan, whose only credentials for his shiny Chief Vision Officer title were a flimsy LinkedIn page and a last name that came with reserved parking. We hadn't spoken in months, not since he'd called my job glorified paper shuffling during an all-hands Zoom. My first instinct was to ignore it. When a man who thinks regulatory timelines are a mood suddenly demands your presence in the boardroom, it's never good news. But after being iced out for weeks, removed from calls, uninvited to meetings I'd built from scratch, some tiny part of me wondered if this was a chance to reset. Maybe Ryan had realized the compliance ship was sinking and finally wanted my help. Doubtful, but possible. I grabbed my gray blazer, the one with a coffee stain only I could see, and headed down the hallway of Stratagem Biotech, our gleaming temple of artificial optimism. The patterned carpet pulsed under the fluorescence, triangles of migraine colors that seemed to vibrate with each anxious step. 8 years in regulatory strategy teaches you to suffocate your instincts. You don't panic, you archive it. Halfway to the elevators, someone grabbed my elbow, firm but careful. It was Ethan, a junior analyst who still read the footnotes in compliance decks. Smart kid, polite, the kind of person you wish the company wouldn't grind down. "Don't go in," he whispered. "What?" I blinked. "Don't go to the boardroom," he repeated, glancing over his shoulder like he'd stolen a federal secret. "There's a presentation queued up already. Your name's all over it." "My name? They're saying you authorized a trial deviation," he murmured. "Big one. Non-compliant. It's in the pre-read." The air left my lungs. "I haven't signed anything in weeks. They say it was your call. You left it undocumented." My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I hadn't even had login access since Ryan's team modernized the system, meaning they'd locked half of us out. Ethan's face twisted with guilt. "I shouldn't have told you. You didn't hear it from me." Then he disappeared down a side corridor, head low, like a spy retreating after a dead drop. The elevator dinged. I didn't move. I just stared at the closed doors, my reflection warped by brushed metal, the silence deafening. My pulse whispered a warning. If this is what you think it is, that boardroom isn't a meeting. It's a setup. I turned and walked straight out of the building. No coat, no bag, just the certainty that if I stayed, I'd be signing my own execution memo. The drive home blurred into one long panic attack on wheels. My hands shook so hard I nearly rear-ended a delivery truck. Not anger yet, fear, disbelief, betrayal coiling together like barbed wire. If they were trying to pin this on me, someone had forged my authorization, which meant someone had hacked our system and used my digital signature to push through an unapproved trial. I didn't even shut my car door before pulling open my laptop. My fingers moved on autopilot. My personal Wi-Fi had long been replaced by the coffee shop's unsecured network across the street. Old paranoia paying off. My inbox looked like a crime scene I hadn't realized I'd built myself. Meeting invites I'd never seen. Threads with my name CC'd after the final decision was made. Attachment stamped, approved by L. McKay. My name, my signature. One file caught my eye. Quarterly Audit Risk Review. Sounded routine. Slide 4 nearly stopped my heart. Protocol 7.2. Authorization Risk. Critical. Signed by L. McKay, Compliance Division. It was dated after my credentials had been revoked. They'd turned me into the perfect scapegoat. And the worst part? They did it sloppily, like they never imagined I'd fight back. I stared at my forged name and whispered to the empty room, "You picked the wrong paper pusher." I sat frozen for a long moment, just watching my name glow on the screen like a curse I hadn't cast. 8 years of building airtight audit trails, and suddenly, I was the hole in the hull. That thought alone snapped something inside me. I shoved my hair back, opened my encrypted local folder, the one I never synced to Stratagem's cloud, and began assembling a timeline. Every protocol I'd approved, every deviation I'd documented, every email I'd sent in the last 6 months. I wasn't scared anymore. Fear had burned itself out. What was left was precision. The kind that comes from habit, muscle memory, and rage buried under professionalism. It didn't take long to find the first red flag. A trial authorization dated July 9th, supposedly signed by me, time-stamped the same hour I'd been logged into a federal compliance review via facial recognition. Impossible, provably false. I dug deeper, checking metadata on another file. June 2nd, batch release approval. The timestamp read 11:43 p.m. That night, I'd been at the hospital with my sister after surgery. My laptop had stayed at home, asleep. Whoever had forged my credentials didn't even bother to match my work hours. My chest went cold. They weren't just sloppy. They were arrogant. I pulled out an external drive labeled Stratagem Backup Sausch Old, plugged it in, and opened 2 identical documents, one pre-update, one post-update. There it was, a new metadata field labeled Delegated Authentication ID. Something small enough to look like a harmless addition, but the second I saw it, my stomach dropped. It wasn't linked to an employee account. It was tied to an API key, an automated access point. Anyone with admin credentials could stamp an authorization under any name without triggering an alert. And who had admin privileges? Ryan's new automation team, the same group who bragged about replacing 3 departments with a handful of scripts. I leaned back, fingers trembling but steadying fast. They hadn't just borrowed my name. They'd built a digital puppet version of me, a ghost compliance officer they could hide behind while skipping FDA procedures. I started pulling receipts, screenshots of document hashes, timestamp mismatches, system log snippets. Every fake signature got a red sticky note, every uncertain one yellow, every verified one green. Within 2 hours, my desk looked like a forensic quilt of corporate rot. That's when I found the real smoking gun, a cached email from Ryan to his father, accidentally saved to my local storage months ago during a file migration. Just one line. Once the compliance backlog clears under LM's authority, we can certify Phase 3 ahead of schedule. My breath caught. They hadn't chosen me at random. They needed my signature, the regulator's blessing. My name was their shortcut to millions in investor confidence. I wasn't the scapegoat yet. I was the disguise. For a second, I almost laughed. They'd underestimated me so completely, it bordered on performance art. Ryan thought my silence meant submission. But silence is only weakness if you mistake it for absence. I opened a new desktop folder and named it Back Channel Audit. As I copied files into it, I realized something eerie. Whoever forged those documents had worked from a different time zone. The embedded metadata tagged UTC-7, not Eastern. Our systems had always run on Eastern, which meant someone had been executing those scripts remotely, probably from Stratagem's California lab. That was Ryan's turf. I cross-referenced the activity logs. Same offset, same credential string. Deleg Alpha Sys, a subroutine. Not even a person, a machine. And when I reopened the internal update memo from 6 months ago, I saw it, buried in the fine print. Delegation functions now permitted via authenticated API under Executive Compliance Profile. That was my profile. They'd literally wired my identity into their automation. My authority turned into a function call. My pulse went silent. I backed up everything twice, printed copies, and slipped them into a folder labeled Whistle, Draft 1. They thought they'd buried me in paperwork, but I was digging up a weapon. The more I stared at the mess on my desk, the more it started to make sense. An ugly, perfect sense. Every missing email, every sudden calendar removal, every unintentional system lockout. It wasn't coincidence. It was construction. They'd built a cage around me, using my own compliance tools as the bars. I wasn't paranoid anymore. I was right. Then I remembered something. The old Slack backup. Months ago, when Ryan's team announced they were migrating communications to a proprietary internal platform, I'd exported a local copy of our channels just in case. I dug through my downloads folder until I found it. SLK Arch Q. Zip. Double-click. Decompress. Inside, a thread dated 2 weeks before the first forged authorization. Max, systems engineer. Can we delegate override off on the trial protocols? Lauren's backlog's insane. Ryan, if we run it through her profile with elevated trust, it won't flag. Janessa, intern. Do we need written approval? Ryan, nah, she'll never see it. Trust me, it's covered. There it was. My blood turned to static. She'll never see it. Not she approved it, not she signed off. Just she'll never see it. Janessa had left the company weeks later. No farewell email, no trace. Now I knew why. They weren't just cutting corners. They were rewriting safety protocols, pushing human trials through without oversight, using my credentials to fake compliance. This wasn't a corporate screw-up. It was criminal. I printed the thread on heavy stock paper, the kind that smudges less when your hands are shaking, and labeled it Whistle 1. That's when I stopped thinking like an employee and started thinking like an investigator. If they wanted a fall person, I'd give them a witness instead. I opened my private drive. Buried among old wedding photos and IRS folders was a relic from my first regulatory audit, a shortcut to the Office of Scientific Integrity, the federal body that handled research misconduct. I hadn't visited their portal since 2016, but I still remembered the process. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't fast, but it was real. I took a deep breath and logged in from my personal laptop, not the company-issued one. Different network, different IP. No digital trail they could erase. It was 1:07 a.m. My kitchen lights hummed softly, the world outside silent, the disclosure form loaded in grayscale like an old confession booth. I attached everything, the API logs, the time zone mismatches, the Slack thread, the memo. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The evidence did it for me. I titled the file, Systemic Manipulation of Oversight Logs via Unauthorized Automation Delegation. I clicked Submit. The screen flickered once, then displayed a receipt ID. I saved it twice, encrypted it, and moved it to a USB drive labeled Recipes. Then I deleted the cache, cleared my history, and powered down. It wasn't courage. Not yet. It was instinct. I didn't even know if anyone would read it. Maybe it would vanish into the bureaucratic black hole where whistleblower reports go to die. But that night, for the first time in weeks, I felt something that almost resembled control. I woke up to silence. No alerts, no knocks on the door. Just sunlight creeping through the blinds and the quiet hum of my laptop still cooling on the counter. I made coffee, logged into my personal Outlook, and stared at the folder titled Back Channel Audit. I kept adding files. Each timestamp was a fuse. Each forged authorization, a spark. If Stratagem thought they could burn me, they'd learn what happens when you try to light a fire in a room full of oxygen. For weeks, nothing happened. No knocks, no warnings, no sudden IT updates erasing my access. Just eerie silence, the kind that makes you wonder if the storm already passed, or if you're standing in its eye. I went through my days pretending to move on, but every night I added another piece to the mosaic. More metadata, more logs, more cross-references. I didn't realize how much evidence I'd hoarded until my printer started choking on paper. Then, one morning, Stratagem's internal bulletin quietly announced a leadership restructuring. No names, no explanations. But that same day, our general counsel's calendar went dark. 1 minute, she was tagged in 5 standing meetings, and the next, her profile was marked inactive. She'd been there longer than the CEO himself. A survivor of mergers, layoffs, and shareholder mutinies. If she was gone, something had cracked. Still, I said nothing. I didn't call Ethan. I didn't reach out to anyone in compliance. I just waited. Waiting was a kind of revenge. People mistake silence for surrender, but it's really the quiet before the report drops. 3 days later, a new message appeared in my LinkedIn inbox. I almost ignored it. The sender's name, Paul Kravitz, jolted me upright. I knew that name. A senior investigator with the Office of Scientific Integrity. I'd seen him speak once at a compliance summit years back, the kind of man who could make an entire ballroom of executives sweat by just reading the word audit. Paul Kravitz. Ms. McKay, thank you for your documentation. Your disclosure was reviewed and deemed sufficient for formal inquiry. Please confirm availability for confidential correspondence. You will not be named unless you elect to be. I read it 3 times, my pulse thudding like a drum. My hands shook, not from fear, but from release. Proof that someone had actually read the file I'd uploaded in the middle of the night months ago. The match had finally touched the fuse. That same afternoon, Stratagem's investor relations page updated quietly. Quarterly earnings call. Canceled. Not postponed. Canceled. Then a notice about an ongoing regulatory evaluation. The words were clinical, sanitized, but the tremor behind them was unmistakable. Something had detonated. By evening, I started getting screenshots from Ethan, private Slack messages, frantic, half-deleted. Are we under investigation? Who accessed the 7.2 logs? Someone from legal just got pulled into a closed session. I didn't reply, but I read every line. The ripple was spreading. The next morning, a courier knocked. He wore a plain dark jacket, no logo, no smile. Delivery for Ms. McKay, he said. I signed, heart hammering, and placed the thick envelope on my kitchen counter. No sender listed. The seal read, Confidential, Federal Correspondence. I didn't open it. Not yet. You don't rush moments like that. You let them breathe. By nightfall, word leaked that Ryan's team had been temporarily relieved of operational duties. His glossy motivational posts vanished from LinkedIn. The company Slack workspace renamed his channels to Archived Vision. I sat there on my couch, barefoot, tea cooling beside me, and realized they'd finally noticed the wire I'd laid months ago. The strange thing was, I didn't feel triumph, just an immense, echoing quiet. The kind that fills the space after the gunshot, but before the echo fades. A week later, the real show began. I got a call from a blocked number. Not a voice, just an automated message confirming receipt of whistleblower protections under OSI Title IV. It didn't say my name, but it didn't have to. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. I was no longer the ghost they'd tried to bury. I was the shadow on the wall reminding them who turned out the lights. The boardroom smelled like desperation and overbrewed coffee. Even through the live stream, I could feel it. That mix of leather chairs, recycled air, and corporate panic too sterile to name. I wasn't there, of course. I didn't have to be. Stratagem's leadership had called an emergency alignment session, and Ryan Mercer was front and center, sleeves rolled up just enough to look busy without ever having done the work. The title slide behind him read, Operational Setbacks and Corrective Vision. Compliance Rebuild Strategy. He even said corrective vision out loud with a straight face. 12 people watched. 2 investors dialing in from Hampton's vacation homes, a jittery HR exec chewing her lip, and a few board members pretending not to be afraid. We've identified key lapses in oversight, Ryan said, pacing like a TED Talk reject. Unfortunately, Some of those issues trace back to legacy systems managed by former team members, no longer with the company. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. Then he said my name. Lauren McKay was responsible for maintaining compliance architecture during the system overhaul. Since her resignation, the door opened mid-sentence. No knock, just a sharp click of the handle. A woman entered wearing a black blazer, expression carved from granite. A federal badge flashed at her side. The oxygen left the room. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. She walked straight to the general counsel, a man who looked like he'd aged a decade since last quarter, and handed him a sealed folder marked in red. Federal Disclosure Authority. Confidential. The GC's hands trembled as he opened it. He read one paragraph, then stopped. His face turned the shade of copier paper left out in rain. No one moved. "What is it?" Ryan asked, voice suddenly small. The GC didn't answer. "Is it about Lauren?" Ryan pressed. "She's not the subject of any inquiry," the GC said finally, tone flat as a court transcript. Ryan blinked. "But she resigned." "She didn't resign," the GC interrupted. "She recused herself per federal disclosure standards." Murmurs rippled. One of the Zoom board members muted their mic, probably to swear. Then the GC added quietly, "Her sealed documentation predated the compliance updates." Silence followed, thick, syrupy, and suffocating. Confusion curdled into dread. Investors leaned back. HR stopped breathing. Ryan stared at the glowing screen behind him, the slide still reading Legacy Oversight Failures, McKay Compliance Tier. The CEO's face went rigid. He slammed his hand on the table so hard someone's cappuccino rippled. "I want a name," he barked. If she didn't do it, who the hell did? Nobody answered. Ryan opened his mouth, maybe to smooth things over with some empty jargon. But the GC raised a hand. "You should hear this." He pulled out a single page from the folder and read aloud. On the 11th of April, Lauren McKay, acting as compliance officer, identified systemic manipulation of oversight logs following unauthorized software updates by non-vetted personnel. Said manipulations are inconsistent with Protocol 7.2 and constitute potential federal violations. Officer recused herself and submitted a sealed disclosure to the Office of Scientific Integrity pending external investigation. The words landed like a gavel. Someone exhaled too loudly. Another board member scribbled a note and underlined it twice. The CEO blinked, his jaw tightening. She filed it herself? Before the deviations occurred, the GC said. Before the automation changes were finalized, Ryan had gone pale. The kind of pale you see before a man faints or throws up. She never said anything. She wasn't supposed to, the GC replied coldly. That's the point of a sealed submission. Any further communication would have compromised the investigation. But her signature's on those documents, Ryan blurted. I saw the metadata myself. Every authorization using her credentials after April 11th, the GC said, his voice rising, is presumptively invalid, which, considering the API trail and software logs, also makes them potentially criminal. The word criminal cut through the room like a guillotine. One of the investors quietly turned off his camera. The HR exec looked ready to cry. The CEO turned to Ryan, voice low, deadly calm. You said she approved everything. You said she was on board. Ryan swallowed. I thought she... You used her name like a stamp, the GC snapped. And now the Department of Justice wants to know why. The next few minutes inside that boardroom became legend. The slide deck behind Ryan froze mid-transition, still labeled Projected Recovery Q3, Q4, as if optimism alone could save them. Nobody spoke. The silence grew heavier than the marble table it hovered over. The CEO sat rigid, his face turning the exact shade of corporate panic, that washed-out gray that precedes an executive resignation. Finally, he exhaled through his nose like a man realizing he'd just been standing on a trapdoor. "You said she was negligent," the CEO whispered. "You said she'd gone quiet, checked out." Ryan's mouth moved, but no words came out. Sweat slicked the back of his neck. He looked smaller. The designer confidence peeled away, leaving nothing but panic and entitlement. Every approval tied to her login is tainted. The general counsel continued. Every trial certification that used her credentials after April 11th must be revalidated, which means everything we've released for Phase 3. That landed like an anvil. An investor muttered something under his breath. Another pinched the bridge of his nose like a migraine was blooming. The HR director whispered, "That's millions in recertification," but no one answered. The GC pressed on. "Because those signatures were tied to unauthorized automation protocols, the department will treat them as falsified. There's already an inquiry open." The CEO turned slowly toward Ryan, voice so quiet it almost broke. "You built this system. You told me it was secure." Ryan's lips trembled. It should have been. It wasn't," the GC said sharply. "It was reckless." He reached back into the folder, sliding another page across the table. The header read, "Internal Slack Communications, Exhibit B." The 3 lines I knew by heart. "If we run it through her profile, it won't flag." "Do we need written approval?" "Nah, she'll never see it." The CEO's eyes widened. He didn't yell this time. He just stared at Ryan like he was looking at a ghost, or a mistake too large to undo. The investors started whispering, their microphones still live. Words like liability, oversight, criminal exposure drifted through the call like smoke. Ryan sank into his chair, color draining from his face. "This isn't fair," he muttered weakly. "I didn't." The GC cut him off. "You impersonated a compliance officer on a federal protocol. That was it." The sentence hung like a tombstone inscription. The CEO rubbed his temples. "We're finished," he said quietly. The moment those signatures went digital, our credibility evaporated. I wasn't there to see it, but later I'd hear the story told like an office ghost tale. The day the CEO slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "Get him out of here!" Security didn't make a scene. Ryan just stood, stiff as a marionette, gathered his tablet, and left. The press release dropped 2 days later, buried deep on Stratagem's website between an investor FAQ and a quarterly recap. The headline was carefully sterilized. Chief Vision Officer Ryan Mercer removed pending federal inquiry. Not fired, not disgraced, just removed. Like a benign tumor. No photo, no quote. The article danced around the truth with surgical precision. Buried 6 paragraphs down came the line that stopped me cold. A regulatory strategist's sealed disclosure earlier this year preserved trial integrity and prompted an internal audit in cooperation with federal investigators. That was me, unnamed, untagged, but right there between the lines. I sat on my porch reading it on my tablet, sunlight cutting through the maple branches, a mug of mint tea cooling beside me. The neighborhood was quiet. Kids at school, dogs asleep behind fences. I thought I'd feel triumph, or rage, or vindication so bright it burned. But instead, all I felt was stillness. Because finally, everyone knew what I'd known all along. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it's the sound of the detonator before the fall. 2 weeks later, the second shoe dropped. Stratagem Biotech released a sanitized SEC filing citing executive health concerns and organizational restructuring. Translation: the CEO had stepped down. No farewell statement, no company-wide email, just a line in legalese buried between market disclaimers. The kind of exit you write when silence is cheaper than explanation. The headlines were predictable. Leadership transitions amid regulatory review. All sterile language hiding the fact that the company had been gutted from the inside. Investors pretended to stay calm. Employees whispered in break rooms, and HR hosted a wellness Friday to keep morale from flatlining. The irony was delicious. I hadn't gone back to the office. My resignation had never been official, but it didn't need to be. My keycard had been deactivated the same day Ryan was escorted out. That was fine by me. Stratagem wasn't my world anymore. It was just the crime scene I'd survived. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "You saved us all. I mean that." I stared at it for a long minute. He'd been the one who warned me. The kid who could have stayed quiet but didn't. That small act had started everything. I typed back slowly. "You just told the truth. I did the paperwork." I set the phone down and went outside. The late afternoon sun spilled gold across the porch. The little mint plant I'd bought months ago had gone wild. Thick, fragrant, unruly. It reminded me of myself, surviving without permission. For the first time in what felt like forever, my laptop wasn't a weapon. It was just a tool. Still, habit made me check my inbox. 2 new messages sat at the top, both flagged priority. The first was from a mid-size biotech firm out of Denver, Ms. McKay. "We've followed recent developments at Stratagem. Your handling of the compliance breach was exemplary. We'd like to discuss a senior ethics position. Discretion guaranteed." The second came from a Washington, D.C. regulatory consultancy. "Lauren, our team read the full report. We're expanding our compliance division and believe your insight could shape our new oversight protocols. Are you open to a call?" I smiled. Not wide, just enough for it to register. They didn't just want my resume. They wanted the foresight, the vigilance, the kind of unglamorous competence no one notices until it saves them from ruin. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I closed the laptop, leaned back, and listened. A neighbor's mower buzzed faintly down the block. The world had the audacity to go on, quietly, peacefully, as if I hadn't just detonated a corporate empire with a PDF. I thought of Ryan, his voice echoing in that boardroom, his perfect confidence cracking into stammers. I wondered if he ever understood what really happened, that I didn't outsmart him with hacking or revenge, but with the one thing he'd never valued: documentation. The boring, meticulous truth. They'd built an empire on shortcuts, thinking the rules were ornamental. But I'd spent my career memorizing every clause, every timestamp, every line of the federal code they thought didn't apply to them. And in the end, it wasn't rage that ruined them. It was record-keeping. The sun dipped lower, and I sipped the last of my tea, now lukewarm and sharp. Somewhere out there, Stratagem's board was still cleaning up the wreckage, revalidating trials, re-auditing data, and rewriting their own history without the name Lauren McKay anywhere near it. And that was perfect. I didn't need credit. I didn't need applause. I'd already written my name into the metadata of their downfall. You needed me in the boardroom, Ryan. You just didn't know why. The breeze carried the faint hum of life. Birds, traffic, the rhythm of a city that had no idea it was built on quiet revolutions like mine. I exhaled, soft and steady. The sound of a woman finally done fighting ghosts, because sometimes justice doesn't make noise. It just deletes the wrong name from the slide.